So we're going to take today a non-new build. This is a factory gun, and the customer wants a trigger job done on it, and also the slide is hanging up on the disconnector head when it tries to come back forward. So I wanted to do this. We'll break this gun down and show you how, when we're not doing a new build, what all we have to do for a trigger job. Now this one came in with a really nice trigger to start with, at roughly 3.5 pounds, I think it was. Much easier. Yeah, a little over 3.5 pounds. So we're going to try to get this down about another pound. But one of the things that I want to also do is there's a lot of over travel. Once that hammer breaks, the trigger still travels back a good ways, and as a result, it's got a long reset. And I want to try to eliminate some of that reset. This is almost impossible without the slide on it. Yeah, it's got quite a long reset, so we're going to try to take up some of that reset as well. And so this is not going to necessarily be a video on disassembling a 1911, because if you're undertaking doing a trigger job on one, I'd like to presume that you know how to disassemble it. That may be lofty on my part, but So again, this is not going to be a disassembly video. Like I said, we're going to hope that you've got that part down if you're trying to undertake doing a trigger job on a 1911, because we do ours a pretty common way. We use a 25 power microscope to examine the Sear and hammer full cock notch engagement surface, and it's all, so ours is all done visually to make sure that our angles are correct. And so get this in there. There we go. Really nice G10 grips. This is a Springfield Range Officer. Nice gun. Looks like, I think it's a one-piece magwell. But anyway, so yeah, we're going to look at lightening this trigger up substantially and shortening the over travel a little bit. The pre-travel seems to be okay, but we may be able to get a little bit of that out as well. Customer is saying that he's going to use this for that's one of the Wilson slip-on magwells. Said he's going to use this for, I believe he said USPSA. Actually a pretty good fit for the magwell. So, and some people may have issue with the way it's disassembled, but been doing it for 20 years with no issues. So got the main spring housing, and So one of the things in variation from a new build to doing an existing gun is the safety is often fitted after doing a trigger job on a new gun. And so when we do a trigger job, if it gets too aggressive, you may run into some issues with the safety being a little bit more trigger travel before it catches the sear. So hopefully we won't run into any issues with that. If we do, we'll address it. So to begin the trigger job, yeah, see that trigger should pretty much fall back into place under its own weight, and it's not. You have to push it down. So that's one of the first areas that we're going to address, because again, doing a trigger job, the biggest thing that we're trying to do is eliminate friction. We don't necessarily want to change tolerances, but we want to eliminate friction wherever we can. So the 5 components that get really dialed in on a trigger job for a 1911 are laying here. The frame, the disconnector, the sear, the hammer, and the trigger itself. Now there is some minor work that has to be done on the track that the trigger rides in the frame, and so that's where we're going to start. And you'll want to get a file that fits that trigger track. Those are available from many gunsmith supply stores, and if you look, you can hopefully see this is my first video with this GoPro, so I'm not really sure how the quality is going to be, but we're going to go with it. There's the little groove on each side of the frame that trigger rides in. You'll see that when you disassemble it. And all we want to do, we're not wanting to really remove any metal so much as if there's any burrs along that track, we want to try to make sure those are gone, and we just want to polish it so that it's nice and smooth. You will likely see very, very little finish removal when you do this, because again, we're not trying to open this up or remove any metal. We simply want it to glide. I'll do a little on each side. Just until it feels nice and smooth. I mean, it feels pretty smooth. We'll try just real quick to see if that made any difference. We may have to remove, oh, that's it. Look, that's all it took. We had a little hang up there, but it's not going to travel that far back once the gun's assembled. It's now just free floating. It's not hanging up. And that's beautiful. So that's a very limited amount that we had to do to get that trigger to just drop under its own weight. That's beautiful. All right, so we're going to continue on though. We're not going to stop there. I'm going to actually give it another couple of strokes with the file. So there must have been some type of burr that was holding that. And I'll show you in a second another area sometimes that has to be reduced. If you polish this out, and we're going to polish the trigger bow, and if you polish those two out and it's still not free, it's not free flowing like that, it's not just dropping under its own weight, there's another area that needs to be addressed. So let me put this file away because I'm definitely done with it. It accomplished a lot, and we really just did not remove any material at all, which is fantastic. That's a good indicator that we're gonna already have an immediate improvement. Just it falling under its own weight. All right, so let's take that out. If you were to still have some level of resistance in there, a lot of times what will happen is on the top surface of the trigger shoe and on the bottom surface of the trigger shoe, you may have to polish that or even reduce it just ever so slightly, so excuse me, so that it glides in the channel in the frame that it rides in right here. So that should be all we need to do with our frame. Hopefully we're finished with it now. But we want to move on to contact surfaces to reduce friction on the trigger bow. First and foremost, on the rear, we're going to want to polish that down a bit so that that's where the disconnector rides. So we want that to be very, very smooth. And then likewise, where we just polished that trigger track, we want these bows to be nice and smooth. Now a mirror finish is great, and a mirror finish is going to, you know, probably give you your smoothest flow. But what we really want to do here, more so than polish this out, is to a mirror finish, is we want to eliminate and polish any high spots. The high spots are going to be what are making contact. So there are probably several different ways to do this. One of them is not a Dremel tool. A Dremel tool is not going to polish this. It'll polish it smooth, but it's not going to reduce the high spots. So I have a piece of granite that I use that works exceptionally well. And then we're just going to take some sandpaper. This is 400 grit. We'll start with that. And then once I get a pretty good finish on those sides, we will go to 600 grit. So again, you want to be really careful that you don't distort this bow. So it's a bad practice to just grab hold of the top of the bow and start sliding this back and forth, because it's going to tend to possibly cause that to collapse, and then you're going to have issues with your mag dropping out when it's supposed to. So it does wear the fingertips occasionally a little bit, but I will usually just put 2 fingers in there, and that'll keep it nice and flat. Like I said, it will tend to wear down fingerprints. And I'm just going to make a few strokes and then take a look at the surface and see if there are any irregularities, and I'll point them out to you. So a few strokes, we'll wipe that down, and there are. Hopefully they'll show up pretty good on this camera. I'm not really sure, but there is much shinier and smoother areas around the... Your camera's too hot. Okay. There are much shinier areas around the edge of the trigger bow, and it really didn't do much in the center. So we can press this on a little bit farther and go with that. I may have to actually turn a fan on. It's January in Florida, so I don't know why my camera is overheating, but we'll keep an eye on that. May have to get a fan going. So just a few more strokes on that side, and that looks substantially better. Yeah, that looks much better. I don't know if that'll show up on camera or not, but we've got a fairly uniform polish there across it. It's really not got much in the way of machining marks or anything left. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this other side with 400, and then I will change to 600, because if I can get the whole surface as a mirror, then that's obviously going to be ideal. It's not necessary, but it's ideal. So let's see how this side looks after a few strokes. Okay, so pretty much the same thing. Ooh, that might show up great. So if you look, if it shows up, I'm going to try to get it to show up, but right where that punch is pointing, there's a low spot right there that nothing is touching. That's okay. That's okay. It's not going to be in contact with the frame. So you can see the rest of this, except for this area right here, another low spot. The rest of this looks nicely polished. So I'm going to hit that again on the 400. And then I think we'll be ready to move to 600 and probably finish our work on the trigger track and the bows. So this is what your gunsmith is getting $90, $120 for. It takes a little time. It's quite meticulous, and you really want to make sure that you have a good finish. So I have a pretty good surface finish there. I'm not worried about that one small low spot, but I would like to get just a little bit more off the rear of that. Oh yeah, that got it. Okay, so now I'm going to move to 600 grit paper. And I like to use silicon carbide. It works really well. It'll give you a nice smooth finish, but it's also abrasive enough to cut some metal. So this will probably be more when the highs and lows start to show up, when you start getting an even more mirror finish. And we've almost removed that low spot that I pointed out, so it wasn't very low. That looks excellent. All right, let's go to the other side. That looks good. So before I do the rear, I will just drop it in, make sure it's nice and still free flowing. Yep. Okay, so our last surface is going to be on the rear of the trigger bow. Now these do tend to have a bit of a groove in the center. You'll probably, when you look at yours, see, let me see if I can get that angle just right. There's a shiny spot right in the middle of it. I don't know if, maybe right there. There's a shiny spot right in the middle, very small. That is where the disconnector has been riding on it. So this is where we want to be really careful because, you know, I have kind of fat fingers, so I can get one in there and keep it flat. This is actually 320 grit paper. I'm actually gonna just hold at the base of the trigger bow so I don't collapse it. And I'll get a better stroke that way. Oh, that's nice. All right, let's go to 400. Now this part requires obviously nothing more than some sandpaper, and reducing the amount of friction that we're reducing just in the trigger track. I mean, I could reassemble the gun, but I'm going to speculate that it would probably reduce, you know, maybe 1/4 pound off the pull. I'm really anxious with this having a 3 1/4 pound trigger to look at the Sear and hammer full cock notch engagement under the microscope because I speculate that probably to get 3 1/4 pounds, somebody probably just took and loosened the tension on the Sear spring leaf that rides on the Sear. And that's not really an efficient way of reliability on a trigger job for these guns. So that looks really straight, flat, smooth. Our high spot's gone. Let's finish out with some 600 and really try to get that nice smooth finish. Now if there are some machining marks still in there, or even some light sanding marks, that's not a bad thing, because if you apply oil, some people like to put oil where the disconnector, the Sear, all of those parts interface. Those grooves are going to hold that oil. I think we can do a little better. A mirror finish is marvelous, but those grooves will hold oil. And if you know me, you'll know that I am not a fan of oil in guns. Most of them require none. But I understand it reduces friction and wear. All right, I'm gonna go with that. I'd like to have a little bit shinier finish than that, but I'm gonna go with it. And if worse comes to worse, we'll disassemble it, take it back apart, and I'll keep going until it's a mirror. But I think that's gonna be good. So I'm gonna go ahead at this point and put the trigger back in, and then we'll test our hammer again to make, or our trigger again to make sure that it's free flowing. Absolutely, it's exactly what we want to hear. Nothing restricting it. Nice free flowing trigger. Just got a lot of travel on it. We're going to fix that later. Okay, this is the part I'm going to take a quick pause and get some fixtures out. This is the part where we're going to, well actually, yes, we will come back to the fire controls and address those individually. And so we're back, and the trigger, as you can see, is back out of the gun because I did forget one thing. The reason I'm not getting the finish I want, I just stopped with sandpaper. So this is a hard Arkansas stone. And I'm going to do the same thing to polish the bows and the back of the trigger bow. Ooh, that may very well show. Look at that. So that's our high spot. That's what we're now making smooth, smooth, smooth. Much more obvious than when we were using strictly sandpaper. And again, this is where we don't need it uniform all the way across. We have a fantastic work done on that high spot right there. And this is how we're going to get our really, really good trigger job, is with stuff like this. You can see the edges are still kind of not rough because we were with 600 grit sandpaper, but you've got a mirror finish on those high spots. Let's see what this side looks like. Same, same, same. So there, you can see that one looks much the same along the side. That's good. That's going to glide smoothly. Hell, that'll probably be even better than what we had a minute ago. Same thing, grab at the base, maintain my angle. I've even put slight pressure down on the shoe. What made me think of this was I looked over and saw the disconnector, and I was like, I'm going to have to polish that. Ooh, magic. Magic, magic, magic. So you can kind of see, again, let's see if I can get that just right in the camera. It's got a nice mirror finish on it. All right. A few grooves there, but those grooves are low spots. We're not worried about them. All right, so I'm gonna put the trigger back in the gun and I'll come back and we'll address those fire controls. So we're back with the disconnector, and I want to show you the surfaces that we want to polish on this. The first is going to be right here, this flat shoe. That's what rides on the trigger bow. And just running a small punch across it, I can feel it's kind of rough, so we're going to remove some material there. Secondly, this flat surface on the rear, we want to polish that because that's where the middle leaf of our Sear spring rides. I want to polish the head of the disconnector without changing the angles. I want to try to maintain the angles and possibly just ever so slightly round it right here. But definitely want to polish the front and the rear. That's where the slide catches as it moves back and forth. And lastly, I like to polish around the hole where the Sear and disconnector pin goes through, because your Sear is actually riding on it. So if we can have smooth on the sides, beautiful. All right, so we're going to start with simply going back to the 320 paper, keeping it nice and flat. We don't want to change angles here. And it's got some divots in the middle, which are okay. Those are low spots. So you can kind of see right there the divot that's in the middle. That's low. Everything around it is getting hit with paper. That's not. That means it's low. All right, so let's move up to our 400. Good. And lastly, 600. And again, guys, this is a gun. This is not rocket surgery, okay? Yes, it's technical. No, it's not for the faint of heart. Yes, you can mess up some parts and have to replace them, but it's not the end of the world. So we have a fairly good finish there. We'll go ahead and hit that with the stone. That's magic. Okay, so try to get you where you can see. There's a good angle right there. You can see the mirror finish. We've got the divot in the center we're not concerned about. That's going to ride nicely on the bow. Last couple of strokes. Looks good. All right, now we want to polish that second surface where the middle leaf of the Sear spring rides. This one's not super critical. More so is just the angle. And you want to really take this and you want to lay it down to where that feels flat. You don't want it rocking back and forth and under your finger. You want it downward pressure and flat. You can kind of push down here. And that looks pretty good. Another divot right in the center. That's crazy. All right. So we'll do the same thing with our 400. Okay. And our 600. divot's gone. That's good. Now we'll take our stone, and this is a little easier to keep your angle on. There we go. Nice crisp, shiny finish. Okay, the disconnector head, I'm not going to hit it with any paper because I don't want to remove any material. Just going to run it on the stone. May actually have to get a different stone. I think I will. And which one is this? That looks like a medium. Yeah. So I'm going to use a fine India stone first. And just turn it. You want to be careful on this because you can, even though it's a stone, it's the fine India stone will still change your, is enough, abrasive enough to change your angle. And this is again just to kind of, we're wanting to smooth this out. Maybe just put a slight radius on the top. And try to get that slide coming across it a little smoother. And less friction when it's moving up and down with that bow edge polished is going to help it to depress when the slide moves as well. So lastly, we talked about doing these. I'm not really interested in a high finish on these. I just want to reduce any burrs. That looks good. I'll show you what we're doing there. That looks good. All right, so if I can get an angle on it, you can see we're just kind of just polishing it ever so slightly. And folks, that's it for the disconnector. So when we come back, we're going to talk about the two critical parts. So this is the microscope that I use for doing these trigger jobs. And it's I actually got this from Brownell. Most people are familiar that were in the gun world, they're familiar with Brownell. It actually has two pins, one for the hammer, one for the sear, in order to put them in proper alignment, and we'll adjust down looking through the microscope and take a look at the hammer, full cock notch, and sear engagement. These are a little pricey. If you're going to do one trigger job, just take it to your local gunsmith. If you're going to do several, maybe you've got a couple of buddies that want to get trigger jobs done. Some of these fixtures might be something you all could split and make it a little more profitable or cost efficient. So the way that sits, the hammer sits with the hammer face against the tool, and then the sear surface, which even just to the naked eye doesn't look superb. It's kind of greasy too. That's why I don't like oil. We'll put that down in, and then we're just gonna set the sear and the hammer together, and I'm going to put pressure strictly on the hammer strut, and then I have to take and look and adjust in until I get my lighting good and a good field of view. Oh yeah, this has got a lot of room for improvement. So right now it has what's called a positive engagement, meaning that as you pull the trigger, the hammer is going to cam backwards ever so slightly. It's not a bad thing, it's a very safe trigger. Negative would be the opposite. As you pull the trigger, the hammer starts to creep forward. That's bad, that's dangerous, that's a no good, no go. And then there's a neutral engagement where your surfaces for both are perfectly 90 degrees, parallel, perpendicular, all of the above. Who thought you weren't going to use geometry class later in life? Here you are working on guns using geometry. Okay, so there's a fixture, and we'll have to change cameras here in a second. I'm going to go to the old grainy video cam and show you this fixture, but this fixture is going to enable us to square the hammer hooks, square those up to 90 degrees. We have a file for that. And then once we have those square, we'll set our sear angle so that when we begin stoning it, it will match up to that same 90-degree angle on the hammer hooks. And we're going to make a secondary cut on the back of the sear, which this factory one does not have any relief angle on it, any secondary angle. And so that is going to enable this trigger to be a lot more crisp and a lot less travel in the trigger bow before the hammer drops. It's going to be beautiful. In the words of our president, it's going to be tremendous. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be one of the most tremendous trigger jobs ever done. All right, so let me get the other camera out because I don't want to try to use the GoPro for this. And I will set up the jig to do the sear and the hammer full cock notch. We are almost done with our trigger job. This is great. So we verified that the flat on the hammer is perfectly 90 degrees. We have no movement there, so we're going to use the two-sided, the safe-sided file, and we're simply going to use that block as that stoning guide as our guide for our hammer hooks. And I'm going to cut the top of the hook first, because that's really all I need to make sure is square. And I'm going to put just a little bit of forward pressure. Should be all we need for that. And then I'll actually clean that up again with a stone, doing the same process, using just a little forward pressure. And that should clean up our hammer hooks. Take a look at them. Then we'll have to reset the jig. See if you can get a little bit of a view as to the square hammer hooks. That's it. So I've mounted the sear and hammer into the jig to get the right angle now that we have our hammer hooks cut. place the sear in, set the angle, and tighten that nut down. Now we'll have to move this insert around to be able to do the actual stoning on the sear. We're actually finished with the hammer, but we're going to have to cut the sear angles now, the primary and secondary angle. So we'll do that. And as we set that down into the fixture, we're going to have to adjust down the height so that the sear is cleared. And then we will adjust it up so that the stones will actually cut the sear at these angles. So again, I'll take my insert and I'm just going to start applying upward pressure, and as soon as it makes contact, I want to go just ever so slightly a hair more so that I'm actually cutting. Again, we'll use the guide, and I'm going to just start because I don't think it's going to require too terribly much. And we don't want to remove much material here because you can ruin a sear quickly. So I'll just use my stoning guide, make a few strokes. Then I'm going to look at the sear. I can see that it's cut the face of the sear. So I'm happy with that. So now I simply take my Arkansas. Now the sear is actually moving there. Came loose. We're going to have a bad angle there. So in this particular case, we're going to have to go back and look at the angle with the first fixture, or the insert in the first position with the hammer in place, and make sure that we get it set properly. Otherwise, this is going to be completely ruined. So I'm going to reset that, reset the sear, and then I'll come back and stone it again. Okay, so it's reset. We've got just a hair that we're going to take off. Okay. I can feel it just gliding on the fixture, and I can see the edge is getting polished. So the edge is very polished. So now I'm going to loosen this up, and I'll move it to the second position to cut the relief angle. Okay. Now I can pretty much get away without the guide here. I think I'm going to cut a little bit more. That's more polished, I can see it. All right, I'm going to take a look at this under the microscope and see how it looks for the trigger engagement, or sear engagement. Be back. So there's also a couple other pieces that we need to polish surfaces on. One is the sear, which we're going to polish these outside surfaces because that's where it's going to ride against the frame. Same thing with the hammer. We're going to polish these side surfaces, taking care not to actually polish or damage the finish on the hammer itself, but just on the surface where it rides in the frame. And then also we're going to take a stone on the inside of the frame down in this groove where the hammer rides, and we're going to polish that as well as try to get a little far down where the sear is relatively inaccessible, but the hammer definitely we want to take a stone and just polish that. So we'll take our hammer slot stone. And again, what we're trying to do here, just remove high spots and any burrs that might be in there. But you do want to take some caution that you don't damage any visible finish on the gun. Obviously, this is not going to be visible, but we want to just make sure it's nice and free to slide around there. And then the other side. That should be good for that. Doesn't take a lot, remember. All right, so then we're going to take our sear, and again, just on the granite, we'll start with 320. I think this is a 320. Nope, this is a 400. We'll just see how the 400 looks. It's getting us a pretty good finish on the sides there. And again, we've got those low spots. We're not worried about those low spots. We just want high spots hit. So then we'll go to 600. And then we'll finish with the hard Arkansas. Looks good. I don't know how well that'll show up, but it's got a nice mirror finish where the high spots were, and should slide pretty easily. I want to do basically the exact same thing with the hammer. The hammers usually have a little rougher casting, so I'm definitely going to start with 320 on it. But again, you want to be really careful not to damage, and there'll be a slight lip. There'll be a slight lip where that hammer comes up onto the surface that it rides in the frame. So you just have to be really careful not to damage the finish of the hammer that'll be visible. So you can see there, we don't have it completely eliminated for the highs and lows, but that's low spot is minimal. So that should be okay, and then we'll polish it out in the same fashion with 400, 600, and the hard Arkansas. So that'll give you an idea, even with what we just did, at the imperfections that are done at the factory when manufacturing. And it's okay, we just, again, have to eliminate those high spots. So we'll hit our 400. And then we'll finish with 6. So this would be a great view if I can get it just right of how we've polished the high spots, but we still have some lows there that are visible, and they don't look beautiful, but they're not going to affect our function, which is all we're concerned with. Okay. One final thing I want to do is just polish around these bosses where the hammer and the sear ride, but I don't want to take too much off here, and I certainly don't want to damage the visible finish or the shoulders that they are retained with. It feels much better already. Okay, let's do the same thing, then we'll reassemble it. We'll see how it feels. It doesn't take much here either. Yeah, that's nice and smooth. Okay, so let's reassemble it real quick, and we will get a check on how we have, what accomplishments we have made. I think this is quite possibly the hardest part of putting a 1911 back together, is getting the sear disc and disconnector both lined up with that hole. It's pretty simple, it's just probably the hardest part. In front of it. So that's definitely going to require some cleanup. I can feel a lot of grit from the polishing, and it's definitely affecting our pull. Yeah. So let's make some adjustments. So went ahead and reassembled this gun. Was not happy with the trigger pull that we had. It actually increased the weight on the trigger pull versus when it came in. It came in at 3¼ pounds, and I went back and looked, and the sear engagement to full hammer cock notch, or full cock notch on the hammer, was very, very positive. And I wasn't really sure what happened there, but sometimes I guess you just don't get it lined right up on the fixture. Went back in and restoned what we've already done, what we've already shown. Went back in and restoned that sear face and got the correct angle on it, and now The gun has a very nice, it's crisp, it's a very crisp pull, and it's at, that was 2 1/4. Most of what I've been getting since I reassembled it was about 2 1/2. And that's at 2 1/2. All right. So what I also did, if you see a advertisement for your gun, or you replace your trigger and you see what's called an adjustable trigger, the main thing that means there'll be a screw in the bottom of the trigger shoe where you can adjust your over travel. And what over travel helps with is your reset. So I'll try to pick this up pretty good. This trigger, once it fires, it doesn't travel a long way past the break point, and then holding it down when it goes to reset, it barely comes back forward and it's ready to fire again. And there's just ever so slight from the time that it resets. There's ever so much till you hit that wall, and then it fires again. So very happy with the way this trigger job came out. I am playing with some cameras right now and doing some different things. So please subscribe to the channel. I've got a couple of other custom builds that I'm working on right now from scratch, and we'll be doing trigger jobs on those as well. So I'll go back through a lot of what we've shown in this video, and maybe I'll have it perfectly in line with order of operation. I'm going to try to get this in line of order of operation, but you know, just subscribe to the channel and keep an eye on what we've got coming up. Thanks.